Welcome to Parenti Stuff, the podcast. I am your host, Lumpy Louise, and this is the read and discuss of Democracy for the Few, 9th edition. Chapter 10, Political Repression and National Insecurity. So Chapter 10, called Political Repression and National Insecurity, looks at the inequality in treatment of political groups in the United States by targeting left political groups with much more force than the politically right-leaning ones. They have used the IRS, FBI, Homeland Security, and other agencies to go after civil rights leaders and anti-capitalist activists, while the pro-capitalist groups have historically received protections and leniency. The chapter also gets into the surveillance state that has been strengthened year by year since 9/11. And I am realizing, since this is the final edition of Democracy for the Few, which came out in 2010, it's edition 9, Parenti wouldn't have mentioned Occupy Wall Street in it. However, he did write an article or a few about Occupy. This one is called Occupy America, and he talks about how the media deals with politically left movements in the United States. This doesn't quite fit the chapter, but I do want to bring up Occupy a lot, so it kind of fits that. And the chapter he does on media is a couple of chapters away, but he, he's big on the media stuff, so we have plenty to read for that time too. And I just wanted to kind of bring this into it. Hold on, let me get into it. Okay. So Occupy America. He wrote this on November 15th, 2011. Beginning with Occupy Wall Street in September 2011, a protest movement spread across the United States to 70 major cities and hundreds of other communities. Similar actions emerged in scores of other nations. For the first 2 weeks, the corporate-owned mainstream media, along with NPR, did what they usually do with progressive protests. They ignored them. These were the same media that had given the Tea Party supporters saturated coverage for weeks on end, ordaining them a major political force. The most common and effective mode of news repression is omission. By saying nothing or next to nothing about dissenting events, movements, candidates, or incidents, the media co-signed them to oblivion. When the Occupy movement spread across the country and could no longer be ignored, the media moved to the second manipulative method, trivialization and marginalization. All right. So we heard that the protesters were unclear about what they were protesting, and they were far removed from the mainstream. Media cameras focused on the clown who danced on Wall Street in full-blown circus costume, and the youths who pounded bongo drums. A carnival atmosphere, youngsters out on a spree, and no connection to the millions of middle Americans who supposedly watched with puzzlement and alarm. Well, I'll tell you where I was at. I was in the midst of working long hours and wishing I could be there to support these people. That was this middle American. That's what was happening to me. Such coverage, again, was in sharp contrast to the respectful reportage accorded the Tea Party. House Majority Leader, the reactionary Republican Iran-Contra at the time in 2011, described the Occupy movement as growing mobs. This is the same Cantor who hailed the Tea Party as an unexcelled affirmation of democracy. The big November 2nd demonstration in Oakland that succeeded in closing the port was reported by many media outlets, almost all of whom focused on the violence against property committed by a few small groups. Vandalism is so horrible. Many of those perpetrators were appearing for the first time at the Oakland site. Some were suspected of being undercover police provocateurs. Their actions seemed timed to overshadow the successful shutdown of the nation's fourth largest port. Time and again, the media made the protesters the issue rather than the things that they were protesting. The occupiers were falsely described as hippie holdovers and mindless youthful activists. In fact, there was a wide range of ages, socio-ethnic backgrounds, and lifestyles from homeless to well-paid professionals, along with substantial numbers of labor union members. Far from being a jumble of confused loudmouths prone to violence, they held general assemblies, organized themselves into committees, and systematically took care of encampment questions, food, security, and sanitation. One unnoticed community protest was the Occupy Walnut Creek. For those who don't know, Walnut Creek is a comfortable conservative suburb in Northern California with no known record of revolutionary insurrections. Only one local TV station gave Occupy Walnut Creek brief attention, noting that about 400 people were participating. Average age was between 40 and 50. No clowns, no bongos. Participants admitted that they lived fairly prosperous lives, but still felt a kinship with the millions of Americans who were enduring an economic battering. Here was the contingent of affluent but rebellious middle Americans, yet Walnut Creek never got mentioned in the national media, as far as I know. The Occupy movement has promulgated a variety of messages with a daring plunge into class realities. The occupiers talk of the 1% who are exploiting the 99%, a brilliant propaganda formula. Simple to use, yet saying so much, now widely embraced even by some media commentators. The protesters carried signs condemning the Republic's terrible underemployment and the empire's endless wars. The environmental abuses perpetrated by giant corporations, the tax loopholes enjoyed by oil companies, the growing inequalities of incomes, and the banksters and other gangsters who feed so lavishly from the public trough. All right, so there's more to that article. You can look it up. It's called Occupy America. Parenti wrote it on November 15th, 2011. Well, I mean, it was published in Truth Out, so you can find that article if you want to finish reading on the Occupy Wall Street movement that Parenti wrote on. Hold on, I just have to get back to my notes. So anyhow, with that, I'm going to start playing section 1. Rick, if you ever, you can just request when you want to come up, but I remember they set up a teepee at Wu-Tang Park in Milwaukee. One of my friends lived in it. Yeah, I remember some things like that, like seeing some things like that. I never got into what was going on in Boston and stuff like that. I don't think that they were doing the campouts as much in Boston that I can remember. It was more like I was only seeing like the New York stuff when I was seeing it. But yeah. All right, hold on.
Political repression and national insecurity. The corporate-dominated state is more sincerely dedicated to fighting organized dissent than fighting organized crime. The law often appears ineffective when attempting to implement social reforms that benefit the many, but when mobilized against political heterodoxy, law enforcement is pursued with a boundless punitive vigor that itself becomes lawless. The repression of dissent. One agency used by the authorities for political harassment is the Internal Revenue Service, which has gone after civil rights leaders and anti-capitalist radicals. The Communist Party had its assets seized and was legally denied tax exemption for years, while the two pro-capitalist major political parties enjoyed uninterrupted exemption. The State Department and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement exclude anyone from abroad who might be affiliated with communist, anarchist, or allegedly terrorist groups, or who engage in activities prejudicial to the public interest. Every year under these sweeping provisos, scores of internationally prominent writers, artists, musicians, scientists, and labor leaders from other countries have been refused the right to visit and address audiences in the United States. So the government protects us from dangerous thoughts by deciding whom and what we can or cannot hear from abroad. Under a 1990 law, supposedly no one can be refused a visa because of ideology, yet the State Department and ICE continue to maintain a lookout list of hundreds of thousands of persons, many of them connected to peace and social justice organizations, Canadian communists who want to visit the United States must file their fingerprints with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, make pro-American vows, and provide proof that they are now actively engaged in opposing communism. Meanwhile, right-wingers and reactionaries from other countries generally enjoy unchallenged entry. The U.S. government signed the Helsinki Accords, an agreement among nations not to impose travel restrictions upon their own citizens. Yet thousands of U.S. citizens have been denied U.S. passports and put on no-fly watch lists because the State Department decided that their activities were contrary to the interests of the United States. In 2004, regulations were issued barring American publishers from printing books by authors from nations that are under U.S. sanction. The publishers must first get U.S. government approval, which is not easy to do. To further inoculate us from unsafe thoughts, Congress passed a totalitarian-type law in 2003 creating an advisory board that can censor any course curriculum at publicly funded institutions that contains anti-American criticisms of U.S. foreign policy. Corporations have fired employees for having the wrong political opinions. The courts have supported their right to do so, ruling in Lloyd Corporation v. Tanner that the First Amendment of the Constitution prohibits only government, not private sector employers, from suppressing speech. People with affiliations to anti-capitalist groups have been hounded out of jobs in labor unions, teaching, entertainment, and various other fields by federal and state investigators. The FBI has millions of files on organizations and individuals, often containing uncorroborated rumors from anonymous sources concerning personal lives and political leanings. A secret court created by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978 reaches court decisions in complete secrecy, with no published record. Targeted individuals and organizations cannot see transcripts or contest the surveillance in any manner or even be informed that they are under surveillance. The target need not be under suspicion of committing a crime, but might simply be deemed a threat to U.S. national security. 6. During the popular struggles against war and racial segregation in the late 1960s, some activists suffered physical assault and even death at the hands of white vigilantes while police and FBI informants either looked the other way or actually assisted. One police official declared that there were more law officers throughout the country on political intelligence assignments than are engaged in fighting organized crime. In various cities, secret police units have spied on and harassed hundreds of thousands of lawful individuals and organizations. Perhaps one reason authorities cannot win the war on crime and the war on drugs is that they have been too busy fighting the war on political nonconformity. This seems true of the FBI. In 1971, files stolen from an FBI storage facility in Media, Pennsylvania, and subsequently published in national magazines, revealed that the largest portion of FBI work in the Mid-Atlantic region was directed at political activists and draft resistors, whereas only 1% was dedicated to organized crime. Political Repression and National Insecurity, 121. For decades, the FBI conducted a counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, designed to subvert progressive groups. Working closely with right-wing organizations, the FBI used forged documents, illegal break-ins, telephone taps, and undercover provocateurs. The Bureau infiltrated labor unions in attempts to brand them communist-controlled, and it worked with management in the surveillance of strikers. As the New York Times belatedly acknowledged, radical groups in the United States have complained for years that they were being harassed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and it now turns out that they were right. 11. The FBI continued to keep a security index of many thousands of names, mostly from groups opposed to capitalism, who were slated for arrest and detention in case of a national emergency, even though the law authorizing this practice was declared unconstitutional. As one FBI agent stated, the program is still in operation, but under a different code name. 12. As director of the FBI for almost a half-century, J. Edgar Hoover kept elaborate dossiers on notables, including presidents, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, and members of Congress, often threatening exposure of the seamier side of their personal lives in order to win advantage over them. Hoover planted defamatory stories in the press, collaborated with segregationists, and harassed civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. He used FBI funds for his private profit, and accepted lavish gifts from wealthy friends, whom he then protected from criminal investigation. Hoover also cultivated relations with organized crime figures, making no serious effort to move against the mob for more than 30 years. Over the years, the FBI and police continued their surveillance and disruptive infiltration of anti-capitalist parties, peace organizations, environmental groups, civil liberties organizations like the National Lawyers Guild, and advocacy groups for political prisoners. Authorities have made preemptive raids on demonstrators. They have beaten, pepper-sprayed, and arrested lawful protesters without justifiable cause, subjecting them to harsh jail conditions. One dissenter noted that the Washington, D.C. police force can't seem to get its act together to fight crime, yet it can turn out in massive numbers to squelch peaceful demonstrations. Where are all those cops the rest of the year when we need them? So with the police in other cities, they seem so much more capable and determined when attacking union organizers, civil rights protesters, and peace demonstrators than when confronting mobsters or corporate felons. A Senate Judicial Committee hearing in 2006 revealed that the FBI had improperly conducted secret surveillance of anti-war groups, including Quakers and a Catholic peace organization. As one senator complained, What business does the FBI have spying on law-abiding citizens simply because they oppose the war in Iraq? 18. In the months leading up to the Republican National Convention in Minneapolis, an FBI-led terrorist task force infiltrated protest organizations and conducted preemptive seizures and arrests, entering homes, seizing computers and political literature, and handcuffing and arresting peaceful protesters, journalists, and lawyers representing detainees. By the fourth day of the convention, over 800 arrests had been made, almost all peaceful demonstrators, with felony charges lodged against some 200. This increasingly has been the repressive response of FBI and police against demonstrators exercising their First Amendment right to assemble and protest. In the last decade or so, in various cities, police have repeatedly violated our constitutional right to assemble and protest.
Okay. All right. So that was section 1. And a couple of things from the comments. The Espionage Act it's still in play. It can be tapped into anytime they want. And yes, do I remember when they had to tap a phone? I do remember. And Rick, do you know why I remember? I haven't really talked about this, but my great aunt was married into the mob, so my grandparents' house was tapped.
Be careful what you say on this line.
Well, I mean, they're all people are passed away and unalive at this point, so I can,
No, I'm just saying, like, when you get, like, they're like, oh, you gotta watch what you say on that phone. One of the things, I think this came out before the Snowden leaks, right? Like, he wrote this in 2010, you said?
No, he wrote that 2011, like, in November, like, a couple of months after it started. So it was before, I'm going to get into it, like, that's what I was going to get into now, was talking about how, I was going to look at, like, the FBI, is up to with pro-Palestinian, but as you know, like, we're not going to know everything. We're not going to know the extent for years, like, what was happening.
A lot later. Well, I mean, this is the thing, like, the NSA gets created as part of, like, Department of Homeland Security, right? And, like, so, like, that whole time before we knew about it, like, when Snowden leaked all of that stuff about it, this is like what they're doing. So, like, what he's writing this about, like, oh, people's phones are tapped, and at this point, like, after the Snowden leaks, is like everyone's phone is tapped, right? Like, everyone, they know every call anybody makes to anybody, and they can track all of the metadata about anything they want to, and that was all going on at the time, and nobody was even aware of it until well later. But he's going about to get political prisoners, which is, like, also interesting because, like, the reason that we know, and, like, you end up with political prisoners because of that. It's interesting how that works.
Yeah. So, like, I don't know. I was just getting a weird message, but it's saying they might not hear me well, but I think I'm coming through fine. But yeah, like, so what happened was 2012, like a year later, is when that group, let me see, the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, discovers they find the documents about the FBI and their surveillance on the movement, and it began before they were even in Zuccotti Park. Like, it began in August, and they had Homeland Security actually helping warn the capitalists this was coming. So they knew about it beforehand, and they were already spying on people beforehand is one of the things they were finding out too. And then I just have this thing from Naomi Wolf when she went through the documents, and she says the documents show stunning range in Denver, Colorado. The branch of the FBI and a bank fraud working group met in November 2011 during the Occupy protests to surveil the group. And then the Federal Reserve of Richmond, Virginia, had its own private security surveilling Occupy Tampa and Tampa Veterans for Peace, and passing privately collected information on activists back to the Richmond FBI, which in turn categorized OWS activities under its domestic terrorist unit. The Anchorage, Alaska Terrorism Task Force was watching Occupy Anchorage. The Jackson, Mississippi Joint Terrorism Task Force was issuing a counterterrorism preparedness alert about the ill-organized grandmas and college sophomores in Occupy there. Also in Jackson, Mississippi, the FBI and the Bank Security Group, which was made up of a whole bunch of multiple private banks, met to discuss the reaction to National Bad Bank Sit-In Day. The response was violent, as you may recall. The Virginia FBI set that state's Occupy members details to the Virginia Terrorism Fusion Center. The Memphis FBI tracked OWS under its Joint Terrorism Task Force Aegis 2, and so on for over 100 pages. So they find all this stuff that they were being surveilled, that they were, and then like, you know, then I want to, like, with Black Lives Matter, like the same thing. Like we know that, you know, the movement itself was kind of weakened by the liberals a little bit, but they still just declassified a file from the FBI in 2023 where they used Section 702 on 133 individuals arrested in connection with the protest. And Rick, do you know what Section 702 is?
I'm not familiar.
It's part of the FISA. It's part of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It's a provision that allows the U.S. intelligence community to collect, analyze, and share foreign intelligence information, particularly about individuals believed to be located outside the U.S. This information can relate to matters like terrorism, weapons proliferation, and other foreign intelligence threats. These 133 people, though, were U.S. citizens here, and all they wanted was to, you know, get rid of some of the racism and excessive force out of policing. So, yeah.
You think that the feds that are watching us are like, oh, yeah, I remember that. I was on one of those task forces.
Oh, they're talking about me. They're all proud. Yay.
They're like, oh, yeah, totally.
That was me. Damn it. So that just a couple of weeks ago, the FBI started pounding on doors in Michigan, right? Behind these doors were the living spaces of pro-Palestinian activists. The FBI confiscated their electronics and other personal items, and the FBI declined to explain what the warrants were for, but confirmed the warrant came out of the Michigan Attorney General's office, Dana Nessel.
Dana Nessel.
Yeah.
I have met Dana Nessel twice, and I have a huge bone to pick. Fucking awful. No, because, like, I thought she was, like, one of the chill Democrats. Like, when I was organizing them, she was the only one, because, like, she helped with, like, when the cannabis laws passed here, she passed it in, and she, like, also was, like, I don't know, she would, like, make out with her girlfriend in front of Mike Pence, and, like, it's like, she was, like, I don't know, relatively radical. But then when Rashida Tlaib got censured, she wrote this whole screed on Twitter. She could have said nothing, but instead what she said was like she was, like, appalled that, like, she couldn't, like, I don't know, she's an attorney general of Michigan. She doesn't have to say anything about what's going on in Congress. She puts this whole screen about how, like, we can't trust Rashida Tlaib anymore, and how, like, we have to, like, denounce her and all of this stuff. And it's just like, it was so infuriating, and I couldn't believe that. And I realize now that she's, like, one of the more awful people, and it doesn't surprise me that she's very, very much a Zionist. And I feel bad because I voted for her ass.
I think 2018 is where, like, I was finding this stuff out about people. Like, I don't know if I explained to you, like, my involvement with the AOC, and, like, my involvement with that 2018 blue wave, because I was doing, like, graphics for you know, people that were running third party and stuff. But some of the, you know, the progressive Democrats came to me and asked me if I could make, you know, graphics and stuff. But they didn't want, like, the AOC people didn't want me to, like, say that I was supporting her because I was kind of troublesome on Twitter. Like, I was, you know, I was me. No.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't know about all that, right? So the stuff with the Michigan stuff was like Nessel, like, it was all over $100,000 of vandalism, And so the pressure for her to make these charges was the University of Michigan's governing board. And on that governing board, the regents are like Jordan Acker, who served as attorney advisor to Janet Napolitano in the Department of Homeland Security. So, he has ties to that. There's this guy, Paul Brown, who was a managing partner in a venture capitalist firm. So, he's eLab Ventures. So, where he lies. Denise Illich is the owner of Illich Family Companies, who owns Little Caesars and the Detroit Red Wings and Tigers, among other things. And then you had Mark Bernstein, who has made statements regarding BDS, which he called intellectually bankrupt and morally repugnant expressions of anti-Semitism. So those are the people that were, pushing for these charges to me. And then I just saw before I came on here that the arrest from last year, I can't remember the number. I don't know if it was over 30 or like probably much more than that. From last year, from the Palestinian protests, Nestle had to drop those because it was probably she wasn't going to be able to, it was going to show her bias as being a Zionist if she kept going with them, is basically what it said.
Yeah.
So
no, there's a lot of feds associated with Michigan Democrats, as it turns out. Also, Alyssa Slotkin is former CIA.
Oh yeah,
and one of the top Dem, her.
Oh. If you look up the regents of University of Michigan, you actually see I'm saying I think there was 8 of them. Half of them have the first line is that they're a Democrat. They're probably a Democrat. That if that's their first line in their bio, over anything else is that they're a Democrat. So
it's very Feddy. Michigan Democrats, very much so. And just Dana Nessel. Dana Nessel is one of those people, some politicians are just doofy people who believe all of the lobbyists actually, they think the stripper loves them. But some politicians are actually educated and legitimately evil, and Dana Nessel is definitely one of the latter.
Yeah.
Talking to her in real life, I'm just oh, you actually know what's going on.
Oh yeah.
You can actually parse reality, which most politicians can't, in my experience. It makes her much more, that's more dangerous. Someone that knows what they're doing and is doing it. Yeah, that's much more dangerous than. I do worry that if Big Gretch, they're talking about making her Gretchen Whitmer, is probably going to be running in 2028, and if he manages to get in, I think that Nessel will probably make her way into the. Position.
Good fascism under the ladies. It's going to be so beautiful.
Maybe the federal attorney general, even that'll be no good.
Well,
she's queer, and she's
I know
progressive, right? Yeah.
I don't even know what progressive means anymore because they're progressively what? Progressively fascist? I don't know. It seems like they every single time they're going to run to the empire and not fight against it. So I don't know.
They're making me progressively more pissed off at them.
That's probably what it means. All right. Let's listen to section 2.
Political prisoners, USA. Despite claims to the contrary, the U.S. government has a history of politically motivated incarcerations. In 1915, radical labor leader Joe Hill was executed in Utah for a crime he did not commit, most investigators believe. The prominent labor leader Eugene Debs and some 6,000 other socialists, pacifists, and labor organizers were imprisoned or deported during the First World War, or immediately after. The anarchists Sacco and Vanzetti were arrested and eventually executed in Massachusetts for a crime virtually all investigators say they did not commit. Hundreds of war resistors were imprisoned during World War II and the Korean War. Over 120,000 law-abiding Japanese Americans had their homes, farms, and businesses confiscated and were sent to internment camps as security risks for the duration of World War II. Hundreds of Italian and German aliens, including elderly grandparents, were forcibly interned. The Smith Act of 1940 prohibited the advocacy of revolutionary ideas, and was used to jail scores of American communists and other anti-capitalists for the better part of 10 years or more. Others spent time behind bars for refusing to cooperate with congressional witch hunts during the McCarthy era. During the Vietnam War, several thousand youths were jailed for refusing to serve in the armed forces. Thousands more chose exile. Almost every anti-war activist who occupied a position of national or even local leadership was arrested at one time or another, or left the country or went underground. African American leaders involved in progressive community causes and struggles against drug pushers have been railroaded into prison on trumped-up charges, including Martin Sostre, Frank Shuford, the leaders of Black Men Against Crack, often to be subjected to beatings and solitary confinement and made to serve astronomical sentences. In Chula, Mississippi, Eddie Carthen was elected the first African-American mayor since Reconstruction, and the first to oppose the local plutocracy. Carthen initiated programs for nutrition, healthcare, daycare, and housing rehabilitation, and refused to appoint cronies of the big planters. The board of aldermen, dominated by planter interests, cut his salary to virtually nothing, and barred him from his city hall office. The governor had all federal funds to Chula cut off, ending most of the mayor's programs. When Carthen retook his office with 5 auxiliary police, he was charged with assault and sentenced to 3 years, convicted on the testimony of a witness who later recanted. After combing through the mayor's papers, the FBI discovered that Carthen had authorized an assistant to sign his name to a delivery receipt for daycare equipment. For this fraud, he was given an N. Political Repression and National Insecurity 123, additional 4-year sentence. Then, after a black alderman was robbed and killed and the murderers convicted, Carthen was charged with having plotted the murder and imprisoned. He was released only after protest campaigns were launched around the country. The low-income black voters of Chula got a lesson in what happens to democratic leaders who intrude upon an entrenched and wealthy power. Prisoners who openly profess radical views or who protest against prison conditions have been repeatedly denied parole and subjected to mind-altering drugs, beatings, prolonged shackling, isolation, and other mistreatment. From 1968 to 1971, over 300 members of the Black Panther Party were arrested, many held without bail or trial for a long duration. At least 10 former Panthers, convicted on fabricated evidence and coerced testimony that was subsequently recanted, served 30 years each in prison. Panther Albert Washington died in prison after serving over 28 years, during which he was repeatedly mistreated for his political ideas. Panther Herman Bell has been unjustly locked up since 1975, after a trial that included perjured testimony, torture, and evidence suppressed by the prosecution. Another Black Panther, Anthony Bottom, has been incarcerated since 1971. Black Panthers Marshall Eddie Conway, Albert Woodfox, and Herman Wallace served almost 40 years each in prison for crimes that were never proven against them. Another black revolutionary, Robert Hillary King, was released after 29 years in solitary confinement. His conviction was overturned, and he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of conspiracy to commit murder. Panther leader Geronimo Pratt was charged with murder when he was a UCLA student. The FBI conveniently lost its surveillance records showing that Pratt was 400 miles away attending a Panther meeting in Oakland at the time of the murder. After serving 20 years in prison, Pratt had his conviction overturned and was paid a settlement of $4.5 million. Community activist Fred Hampton Jr. was tried on a bogus charge of arson in Chicago. During the trial, no evidence was produced demonstrating that a fire had actually taken place, or that Hampton was connected to the alleged incident. Yet in 1993 he was given 18 years, subjected to harsh mistreatment for organizing around inmates' rights. He managed to get paroled in 2001.27. There is the death row case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, ex-Panther, radio journalist, and articulate critic of social injustice and police brutality. A police officer in Philadelphia was shot by one Arnold Beverly, whose confession to the shooting was corroborated by a lie detector test. Mumia arrived on the scene as Beverly fled and was himself shot by an arriving cop. In a deeply flawed trial involving an incompetent defense, police perjury, and intimidated witnesses, Mumia was convicted and sentenced to death, even though no ballistic evidence linked him to the shooting. Several eyewitnesses have unequivocally indicated that he was not the gunman. He has been on death row since 1982.28. Imprisoned for long terms were members of the American Indian Movement, including Leonard Peltier, accused of shooting 2 FBI agents and convicted on affidavits that the government now concedes were fabricated. Peltier has been incarcerated since 1976.2. 9 Puerto Rican nationalists received an average of 67 years for seditious conspiracy, specifically belonging to a group that intended to overthrow U.S. rule in Puerto Rico. Others who have served or are still serving long sentences are members of the Black Liberation Army, the Republic of New Africa, the African People's Socialist Party, Chicano and North American anti-capitalist revolutionaries, and radical community organizers. In 2001, 5 Cubans, who were monitoring extremist Cuban-American groups in Florida that were plotting terrorist attacks against Cuba, were falsely charged with espionage against U.S. military bases and given draconian sentences. The members of Plowshares, a peace group, jackhammered the concrete around a missile silo in 1984. For this protest action, 11 of them were each sentenced to 18 years in prison. A white woman, Linda Evans, organized so effectively against racism that the Louisiana Ku Klux Klan put her on their death list. To protect herself, she purchased guns using a false identification. For this and for harboring a fugitive, Evans was sentenced to 45 years. Susan Rosenberg and Tim Blunk, anti-capitalist activists, were each given 58 years for weapons possession and false identification. Marilyn Buck, a white person who aligned herself with the Black Liberation Movement, was convicted of conspiracy to use violence against government property and sentenced to an incredible 80 years. She has been in prison since 1983.32. Convicted of attempted robbery and aiding a Black Panther to escape prison, Sylvia Baraldini, a campus radical and anti-war activist, was sentenced to 43 years. She and other political prisoners were held in a high-security unit at Lexington, Kentucky, enduring windowless cells, total isolation and constant surveillance by hostile male guards. In time, their eyesight and health seriously deteriorated. Transferred to her native Italy in 1999 to serve the remainder of her sentence, Baraldini was released in 2006 under a pardon law approved by the Italian parliament. Supporters have pointed out that none of these accused individuals were ever convicted of harming anyone. They were given draconian sentences in prison not for what they had done but for their political activities and ideologies. In this respect, they fit the definition of political prisoners. Environmental activists like Jeff Lewis also have encountered harsh treatment. He was sentenced to 22 years and 8 months in prison for burning 3 sport utility vehicles at a dealership in Oregon, as a protest action against the ecological damage wrought by such gas guzzlers. This was a heavier sentence than given to serial rapists, child molesters, and arsonists. After much agitation, the sentence was reduced to 10 years, given that it was a crime in which no one was injured. Sometimes just uttering the wrong words can be enough. In 2005, a federal court convicted Muslim spiritual leader Dr. Ali al-Tamimi for supposedly remarking to his followers at a meeting that they should go abroad and train for a jihad in Afghanistan. For this terroristic advocacy, he was sentenced to life in prison.
Whew.
Yeah. I have, what I did for this is I have some updates. I kind of looked just mainly at the Black Panthers and I wanted to bring up Move 9 too. So there's a huge list of everyone. So just as updates on some of the people that Parenti mentioned, Mumia Abu Jamal is still, he was not released. He was not released during COVID.
His book is excellent. Live from Death Row. It's a good read.
I'll have to check it out. Yeah. So he's still, they have not let him out. So he's been in since 1981, was it?
Yeah, he's been doing prison activism since he got in. So.
Yeah. And every single one of these people, that's what they did. They went in and they became imams, or, you know what I mean? Like, they were always doing activism. They were always like helping out. They weren't like, most of these people were not troublemakers in the prison either. Or, like in the case of like George Jackson, it was like when they were in trouble, it was, planted trouble. So Kamo Siddiqui was arrested in 2002. So he was a Black Panther all the way to 2002. After living his full life, he had kids and grandkids, and then they did some trumped up charges on him for 1971 Atlanta police officer in 2002. So now he's still serving time. And then Joseph Bowen is still serving time from the early 70s and was refused release during COVID. Joseph Bowen probably did some, he was doing some stuff in prison though. But there are a few who recently passed away while incarcerated. So you had Romaine Chip Fitzgerald. And so he was in there from 1969 till he died in 2021. The hood communist, Romaine, this is just a little blurb on him. Romaine Chip Fitzgerald was no one's potential criminal. He was a revolutionary-minded African with an undying love for his people and a willingness to die for the cause of liberation. And this week, he cashed out on the ultimate price. He paid that price after more than 50 years in imprisonment at the hands of the country that doesn't even have the right to hold mice in a cage. I won't go further because it starts getting a little nastier. So then Ed Poindexter died in prison in 2023. He was in Nebraska. He was a political prisoner by many civil rights advocates, died Thursday in prison after a lengthy battle with diabetes and more than a half a century behind bars. He and David Rice, who died in prison in 2016, were convicted of a murder of a 1970 booby trap bombing that killed a police officer. But like it wasn't them, and this was all within the FBI COINTELPRO. So that's how they get picked up. Then some of them, the better news, like Leonard Pelletier was let out this year. And he's at home. He's still, he's confined at his home. He was not,
he's on medical release.
Yeah. Of the Move 9 members, that was the 1978, the cop unaliving. So 2 of them actually passed in prison. And then there was a few that were paroled. By 2018, they were paroled, which was 10 years longer than the 30-year sentence that they received to begin with. And the last 2 were released in 2020 due to health reasons. Matula Shakur, Tupac's stepfather, was released in 2022, and he had terminal cancer and died 7 months later. Russell Maroon Showitz was a Black Panther who was released in October 2021, and he passed away 2 months later. San Diodata, I don't know, Akoli? I don't really know, but he was finally given parole in 2022. Veronza Bowers Jr. was released in May 2024 after 46 years on bogus evidence and testimony. But he brought up Matakim Jalil. Anthony Bottom was his name before. I'm not good at pronouncing names. I'm horrible. I'm sorry, people. But he was on parole after being incarcerated for half a century at Attica Correctional Facility and Southport Correctional Facility. He was convicted alongside Albert Washington and Herman Bell. I know he went through some of this anyways. So he got released, which was a big deal because he has family members that were pulling for him to get out of there. And then like Ruchell McGee, I feel so bad for Ruchell McGee, like his whole life. That dude, he was 16. He got accused of raping a white woman, or attempting to rape a white woman. So you know what that means because that was 1955. And then he served some time for that. He leaves Louisiana and goes to California thinking this is going to be like great. Like he's getting out of Louisiana. And I mean, they basically kicked him out of Louisiana too. Like they told him he couldn't live there anymore. So he goes to California and there was it was like such a small thing. Like he didn't do, I think he had like some weed on him or something. And they had him. And then he was just all he was doing. He was a witness for the person that was in court that day that Jonathan Jackson came in. So there was the 3 prisoners that were in there, and Jonathan Jackson went in to kidnap the judge to try to get his brother George Jackson released. And Ruchell did not pick up any of the pew-pews, and but he was shot, and then he was found guilty for, conspiracy to do this kidnapping of the judge and everything when he had nothing to do with it. Like he was just in the court. The other two guys were just in the court too. I don't think that they knew what was going to happen. I think they just acted. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's just kind of weird.
What's really gross is like a lot of these releases they like release people when the medical expenses start to become too high. And so it's like not because they come around or they, have any empathy or they decide that like it was wrongful. It's because they don't want to have to pay for hospice care.
I didn't even think of that. And you're probably absolutely right. Yeah. Like, so now the burden's on the family. So the burden the whole time's on the family of, their provider or father or son or, mother or daughter or like is in prison and they have to, deal with that there, that whole time. And then, okay, he's sick enough. You can have him back. It's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's listen to section 3.
Political murder, USA. During the anti-war demonstrations of the Vietnam era, law enforcers used lethal force against unarmed protesters on several occasions. In Orangeburg, South Carolina, police fired into a peaceful campus gathering, killing 3 African-American students and wounding 27 others. Ohio National Guardsmen killed 4 white students and maimed 2 others who were participating in an anti-war protest at Kent State University. 10 days later, at the all-black Jackson State College in Mississippi, police began shooting into a women's dormitory where protesting students had peaceably congregated, killing 2 and wounding a dozen others. Impartial investigations by the very authorities responsible for the killings exonerated the uniformed murderers. Police attacked the Black Panther Party in more than 10 cities, wrecking offices, stealing thousands of dollars in funds, and arresting, beating, and shooting occupants in planned operations coordinated with the FBI. At least 34 Panthers were murdered by police by the early 1970s. A famously dedicated union leader of the United Auto Workers, Walter Reuther, who was playing a key role in activating the labor movement against the Vietnam War, was killed when his small plane crashed in 1970. Evidence indicated that the plane's altimeter had been sabotaged. A year and a half earlier, Reuther and his brother Victor, another UAW labor activist, had barely escaped death in a remarkably similar incident, a malfunctioning altimeter. Weeks before the fatal crash, President Nixon and other Republican leaders had labeled Reuther a dangerous menace. Assassination attempts against both Walter and Victor had occurred years earlier, when both were shot by snipers while in their respective homes, causing permanent injury to both. For years, Reuther had been constantly tracked by the FBI. Between 1991 and 1993, 3 Haitian talk show hosts in Miami, who aired critical commentaries about CIA-supported military repression in Haiti, were shot dead. Individuals in the Cuban-American community who advocated a conciliatory policy toward the Cuban Communist government were subjected to threats and attacks. A right-wing Cuban exile terrorist group openly claimed credit for some 21 bombings between 1975 and 1980 and for the murder of a Cuban diplomat in New York, yet the group escaped arrest in all but 2 instances. In the United States, between 1981 and 1987, there were 11 killings of Vietnamese publishers, journalists, and activists who had advocated relations with the Communist government of Vietnam. In each instance, a U.S.-based right-wing Vietnamese organization, VOE-CRN, claimed responsibility. One of Oren's victims, a publisher of a Vietnamese-language weekly, survived his shooting and identified the gunman. The assailant was convicted, but the conviction was reversed at the prosecutor's request because he had no prior criminal record in this country. The police and FBI claimed that such attacks were unrelated and devoid of a political motive, despite VOE-CRN's politically inspired communiques claiming responsibility. There is the strange case of Professor Edward Cooperman, who was shot in his office at California State University, Fullerton. As founder of an organization advocating scientific cooperation with Vietnam, Cooperman had received death threats. Lam Van Min, a Vietnamese émigré and Cooperman's former student, admitted witnessing the professor's death and was arrested. As he tells it, Cooperman produced a gun that accidentally discharged and killed him. Min left, taking the gun with him for some reason. He then took a female friend to a movie, after which he returned to the office and placed the gun in Cooperman's hand. The office had the appearance of a struggle. The prosecution introduced little to challenge Min's improbable story. He was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, sentenced to 3 years, and served only 1. Min had been previously arrested for possession of stolen property. His lawyer was procured by a right-wing Vietnamese organization. In Chicago, after repeated death threats, Rudy Lozano, a Chicano union organizer and communist, who worked effectively to unite Latinos African Americans, and whites around working-class causes, was shot dead in his home by someone who came to his door on the pretense of asking for a drink of water and who stole nothing. According to family members, paramedics who arrived at the scene thought they could save Lozano's life, but police blocked them from getting near him, because evidence might be destroyed. 43. Other political murders or suspicious deaths in the United States include Alan Berg, a popular Denver talk show host who engaged in impassioned arguments with anti-Semitic and racist callers, and who was killed by members of a white supremacist group. Don Bowles, who, at the time of his murder, was investigating a far-reaching financial scandal that implicated some of Arizona's most powerful political and business leaders. Karen Silkwood, who was investigating radiation safety negligence at Kerr-McGee Corporation. Danny Casolaro, whose uncovering of government and business corruption might have implicated high-ranking U.S. officials. David Nadell, a Berkeley, California, political activist and organizer, whose identified murderer is living at a known location in Mexico. Marine Colonel James Sabo at Marine Corps Air Service, El Toro declared a suicide even though the back of his head was bashed, who threatened to blow the whistle on corrupt covert operators with links to drug trafficking. 4 other specialists and contractors connected with the El Toro operation were all found dead under suspicious circumstances. In 2005, some 100 heavily armed FBI agents surrounded the home of Ojeda Rios, the 72-year-old leader of a Puerto Rican independence movement, who had evaded arrest after the heist of a Wells Fargo truck in 1990. The agents approached with guns blazing. The autopsy performed on Rios's body revealed that he could have survived had he received proper medical attention. Instead, the FBI allowed no one into the house for 18 hours, while Rios slowly bled to death. Amnesty International concluded that the killing had the blueprint of an extrajudicial execution. 45. Federal agents have lent support to violent rightist groups. In the 1970s, a paramilitary peacekeeping force under FBI direction carried out a terrorist campaign on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. That was directly responsible for hundreds of assaults, and for the deaths of more than 60 supporters of the American Indian Movement. In San Diego, the FBI financed a crypto-fascist outfit called the Secret Army Organization, whose operations ranged from burglary and arson to kidnapping and attempted murder. The Senate Intelligence Committee revealed that the FBI organized 41 Ku Klux Klan chapters in North Carolina alone. FBI informants in the Klan did nothing to stop KK members from committing murder and other acts of violence. In some instances, as in the 1979 Greensboro, North Carolina, massacre of 4 members of the Communist Workers' Party, FBI informants procured weapons for the murderers and directed them to the right location. The Greensboro police also knew of the impending attack but took no action. The gunmen were filmed on videotape by journalists who were covering the rally, but the perpetrators were acquitted. From 1969 to 1972, U.S. military intelligence and the Chicago police jointly operated an organization called the Legion of Justice. Its members clubbed and maced protesters and anti-war demonstrators, broke into their headquarters, stole files, vandalized a progressive bookstore, and committed other such criminal acts. Violent right-wingers usually go unscathed by the authorities. The Louisiana District Court that gave Linda Evans 45 years also sentenced Don Black, a KK member who transported illegal weapons and attempted to set up a drug cartel, to 3 years. He was out in 2. When asked what they intended to do about the 15 or so right-wing paramilitary terrorist camps within the United States, a Justice Department official said the camps did not appear to be in violation of any federal statute. An American, Michael Townley, linked with the CIA, admitted in 2005 to having perpetrated a number of assassinations for the Chilean dictatorship in the 1970s. He was given only 10 years for the murder of Chilean diplomat Orlando Letelier and American activist Ronnie Moffat in Washington, D.C., but he was soon freed under the Witness Protection Plan. Luis Posada Carriles was linked to Townley, the CIA, and various terrorist acts including killing 73 people in the bombing of a Cuban airline. The Bush administration, which professed a dedication to fighting terrorism, refused to hand Posada over to Venezuela or Cuba, where he is facing murder charges. Posada's close accomplice in the bombing of the Cuban airline, Orlando Bosch, was pardoned of all his misdeeds by the elder President Bush in 1990, and lives as a free man in Florida. All charges against Posada himself were dismissed by a Bush-appointed federal judge on a technicality having to do with faulty translation at his naturalization interview. 2 years later, in 2009, Posada was indicted for lying about his involvement in a series of 1997 bombings that targeted tourist spots in Cuba. When 2 Chicano socialists were killed by bombs planted in their cars, the FBI made no arrests. When a powerful bomb wrecked the offices of several progressive and civil liberties groups in New York, injuring 3 people, the police made only a perfunctory investigation. After a series of threats, an anti-nuclear organizer was shot dead in Houston and an assistant was seriously wounded. Police came up with not a clue. The FBI was quick to make arrests when leftist environmentalists Judy Bari and Darrell Cherney were injured by a car bomb in 1990. They arrested the victims, Bari and Cherny, calling them radical activists and charging that the bomb must have belonged to them. Bari, an outspoken advocate of nonviolence, was seriously injured in the blast. Never fully recovering her health, she died of cancer in 1997. The charges were eventually dropped for lack of evidence. Bari's organization launched a civil rights lawsuit charging that the FBI itself was involved in the bombing. In 2004, the Justice Department agreed to pay Cherny and the Bari estate a $2 million settlement. Political repression and national insecurity. 129. Rightist terrorists are treated lightly by law enforcers. Leftist groups are treated severely. There is nothing inconsistent about this position. Left groups, no matter how nonviolent and lawful, challenge the corporate capitalist system or some aspect of its privileges and abuses, whereas rightist groups, no matter how violent and unlawful, do the dirty work for that system. Thus there is a community of interest between the rightists and the law agencies and sometimes an unspoken collaboration. However, when right-wing extremists engage in counterfeiting and bank robberies, and plan attacks against federal targets instead of leftist targets, as with the Oklahoma City bombing of a federal building that claimed 168 lives, including 19 children, in 1995, then law enforcers move against them, albeit sometimes belatedly.
Okay. So that was Political Meta USA. This section wasn't easy, not because there aren't stories of political murder happening in the United States, but most always remain with an air of conspiracy, which doesn't mean they aren't true, and it's hard to dismiss the convenience of some deaths. So like it's hard to like talk, like once again, you know, until things really come out, you can't really judge everything yet. I was like in my head going, would the Boeing whistleblowers have something to do with politics? I don't know, with Boeing being Mick, I don't know.
I mean, they are like one of the top military contractors for stuff, so like I don't know.
Yeah.
Certainly has to do with capital.
Yeah. So like, I mean, if you just like search that on Google, then it just comes up, of course, with the presidential assassinations. You don't get anything else. So I look towards the BLM because, recalling, from like 2014 to 2020, there were like 6 mysterious unalivings of Ferguson activists. So you had like DeAndre Joshua was a friend of the witness of Michael Brown's death. He was found, I don't know how to say that, like in the head in a burning car. So he was like, pew-pewed, and then he was put in a burning car. But that was the second one that the same thing happened to.
There was one of them, I can't remember the name. He was found hanging from a tree. Yep. And they tried to claim it was
a suicide.
Self-inflicted.
And it was his mom. So that was Danye Jones was found on the tree and his mom, Melissa, was like, they lynched my baby. Like that it was not him. You had another one that they claim went right to the police station and, pew-pewed himself. The Edward Crawford guy was the one that's in that really famous picture of him throwing the canister. And actually, he was throwing the canister away from children, though they want to claim that he was throwing it at cops, which I don't really care if he was throwing it at cops, because the cops are the ones that threw it at the children to begin with.
Well, also, if it's a non-lethal, non-violent interjection, then like why is it a danger for him to throw it at the cops?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How does that work?
Yep. And then you have Bassem Masri, which was a Palestinian American, was live streaming Ferguson demonstrations, and that's the person they found on the bus, and said they OD'd on fentanyl. So all questionable, like not, I don't know. And then I was talking about thinking about Daniel Perry, who, just goes and, so he goes into the protests. He goes into the crowd. Oh, I got this stupid thing I have to do. What does it want me to do? Objects that have strings. I never get these right. Okay. Played in bands.
What?
They're making me do like, they claim like I'm not a real person or something. And I can't even see these things. Make a ba sound. Oh, no, not make a ba sound. That would be a sheep, right? Okay. Let's see if I get it right. Oh, I finally got it right. Okay, sorry. I always, I'm on my computer and I do this and then it comes up with these, right in the middle of it, it says I'm inactive. I'm talking and it says I'm inactive. So I don't know what's going on.
It's because you don't have a picture of, you don't have video of you on it. And so they want to make sure because it's just a static screen or whatever.
Yeah, my camera's off to the side. You can't see me. No one wants to see me on these things. I don't know. I don't know why, but so Daniel Perry's the one in Texas, right? That Garrett Foster was walking up to him because he drove into the crowd. He drove into the protest. And so the guy was walking up to him and he pew-pewed Garrett Foster. And then that brought me to Kyle Rittenhouse because those were definitely political in nature.
The judge in the Rittenhouse case. A lot of people like that judge is a lot more famous in Wisconsin for just like being virulently racist. Like,
wow.
Like there's like tons of footage of him just like doing racist shit in his court and like telling people like that I don't know, just like the shit that he uses, like talks about, and like there's a whole bunch of videos like years before that case, and when it came up, it's
hard. Yeah, it's all just so disgusting. But yeah, I mean, so there's plenty like of course in my head like, oh, the conspiracy things. Whip out the Clinton list. Then really get myself in trouble, but.
No,
not the Clinton list, but yeah, I mean, there's too many convenience at times that you have to wonder, you know what I mean?
You're gonna have the libs so mad and calling you
I know.
like mega horseshoe theory, all the things when you point out that like maybe all of the people who ever wronged the Clintons weren't suicidal. Like, I don't know, maybe not.
I mean, it's just weird that if you know that many people that are, that's kind of a little weird too, I guess. I don't know. What do I know, though? All right, let's listen to section 4.
The national security autocracy. Within the government there exists a loose grouping of authorities that some have called the national security state, consisting of the President, the Secretaries of State and Defense, the National Security Council, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and numerous intelligence agencies like the FBI and CIA. The national security state's primary function is to defeat movements at home and abroad that seek alternatives to free market globalization. Congress has no exact idea how much it allocates for intelligence operations, because specific funds are hidden in other budget items, in violation of Article I, Section 9 of the Constitution, which declares that no funds shall be drawn from the Treasury except by lawful and publicly accounted appropriation. A deputy director of the CIA stated that the overall intelligence budget was $44 billion in 2005.52. There is the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency, which deals with military espionage and counterintelligence. Every echelon within the Pentagon, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and every regional command around the world has its own intelligence service. The National Reconnaissance Office uses satellites in orbit to eavesdrop on telephone conversations and diplomatic communications, and photograph potential targets for military action. In the early 1990s, the NRO could not account for $4 billion in secret funds. Its top 2 NRO managers were ousted, but no one went to jail. The National Security Agency breaks codes and monitors nearly all telephone calls and telegrams between the United States and other countries. Using the war on terror as an excuse, the Bush administration brought the NSA back into the business of domestic surveillance, spying on Americans whose views differed from those of the White House. Presiding over the entire intelligence community is the National Intelligence Council, established in 2005 to provide the President and senior policymakers with analyses of foreign policy issues that have been reviewed and coordinated among the various intelligence agencies. At one time or another, various intelligence agencies have admitted to maintaining surveillance on millions of private citizens and even members of Congress. They plant their operatives in other units of government. They plant stories in the U.S. media, secretly enlisting the cooperation of media bosses, journalists, and editors. The CIA alone has subsidized the publication of hundreds of books, and has owned outright more than 200 wire services, newspapers, magazines, and book publishing complexes. The agency has recruited thousands of academics across the country as spies and researchers, secretly financing and censoring their work. CIA agents have infiltrated student, labor, and scientific groups. The agency conducts its own resident scholar programs, and offers internships to undergraduate and graduate students. The CIA has infiltrated and disrupted dissenting organizations in this country and abroad. The National Conference for New Politics, a progressive coalition, never recovered from the CIA's divisive and disruptive Operation Chaos attacks from within. The CIA admitted to carrying out mind control projects at over 80 institutions, sometimes on unsuspecting persons, and was responsible for the death of at least one government employee. In violation of the National Security Act of 1947, which states that the CIA shall have no police, subpoena, law enforcement, or internal security functions, the agency has equipped and trained local police forces in the United States, and conducts covert operations against U.S. citizens within this country and abroad.
Okie dokie. You didn't even make note, Rick, that I'm not using the Irish guy.
I was going to mention it. I forgot. Yeah.
That wasn't, I don't know, Speechify keeps changing him on me, so I just figured, I looked and I already pressed the button and it was this guy, John, and I said, all right, I'll just go with John. I don't know. I think I was getting aggravated with the other subsidize, like the way it would pronounce certain words was driving me a little.
He did pronounce Leonard Peltier wrong, like everybody else pronounces it. You know, they're like Leonard Peltier, and it's like, no, it's Peltier. He's from Wisconsin.
Yes,
like,
with the R. With the R. It's not that French name. All right, so I was gonna talk about cop cities here. I actually had this thing I was gonna read from Paul Feather. Let me just read some of it. He has cop cities in the constitutional crisis. Hold on, I gotta pull it up. So this was on Counterpunch just from May 1st, 2025. Let me just read. All right, I'll just start reading it it's easy to get wrapped up in the shock doctrine politics of Donald Trump's second presidency and lose the historical perspective. Maybe that's even the point, to keep people so worked up that we can't rationally or meaningfully respond. I do think there are times that we should respond from the gut, but sometimes these responses are easily manipulated, so there's some value in taking a few moments to zoom out a bit and frame this picture from a little further up looking down. One really helpful thing is to clear up what people in the U.S. are even experiencing. The title of this piece says it's a constitutional crisis, but not everyone calls it that. There are mainstream voices arguing that Musk, Trump, and the Department of Government Efficiency is constituting a coup. Is this a coup? A constitutional crisis? Something else? A coup is a sudden strike, a decisive theft of power. If we call this a coup, it's fairly difficult to take a historical perspective. It's just a surprise attack. But who would even be the legitimate government if the U.S. In power has been stolen in this way? I mean, they can't steal power from themselves. So there are always people who don't experience this as such a sudden attack. People who have been fighting fascism for a long time aren't surprised that it's rearing its head now. And that would be Rick and myself, and probably most of you in listening right now. And so the slow erosion of the Constitution, my gut reaction to a coup feels a little different from my gut reaction to a constitutional crisis, which I do think we've been experiencing for decades. Constitutional crisis being a little more drawn out than coups, and very useful for fascists who tend to find constitutions inconvenient. One of the most dramatic episodes in this ongoing crisis has been that Trump's administration deportation of hundreds of people to a prison in El Salvador, and the attack on the due process many people perceive this to be. A historical perspective is helpful here because people's rights to due process in the U.S. was already seriously eroded. It's easier to completely suspend rights when they're already weakly protected. It's relevant to know that at least as far back as 1979, most criminal charges, and nearly all minor ones, were resolved with no trial, no judge, and no determination of guilt or innocence. Most defendants never go to trial unless their charges are very serious, because the punishing costs of the legal process forces defendants to accept plea bargains just to get out of the pretrial detention. Decades of using the legal process as punishment for criminal charges without bothering to determine guilt or innocence obviously violates constitutional rights to presume innocence, equal protection, and due process. This is a constitutional crisis, decades in the making, though people adjust. During the civil rights movement, churches and bail funds collectively raised money to get people out of pretrial detention. This strategy was greatly expanded during the Black Lives Matter protests, when outrage over the police murders brought people into the street en masse, with over 10,000 arrests between May and June of 2020. So then he gets into talking about the Weelaunee 61 and like what they went through with Cop City and stuff like that, and just showing how, due process, like none of this is going, none of this is going. So once again, you can read the rest of that article. It's a counterpunch article from May 1st called Cop Cities in Constitutional Crisis. So, so basically, this, let me get back up to my notes because it just, this was the National Security Autocracy was the title. So, we can get into talking about the cop cities and how, they're just building these up all over the place. And but we also found out recently that the cops use a fake shoplifting panic to get tons of new equipment, just like weapons of mass destruction. They will use lies to get people to feel unsafe and keep accepting the ever-growing police state. So do you have anything to add, Rick?
No, I'm excited for this next chapter because it starts off with a list of like every country on the planet, the CIA.
All right.
Also, the title is hilarious.
Yeah. It's CIA, Capitalism's International Army of Cocaine Import Agency. All right. Let's listen to that.
Political Repression and National Insecurity 131. CIA, Capitalism's International Army, or Cocaine Import Agency? U.S. intelligence agencies do more than just gather intelligence. One could fill volumes delineating their crimes against humanity. In countries like Guatemala, Greece, Brazil, Chile, Indonesia, Argentina, Zaire, Guyana, Haiti, Panama, Mozambique, Angola, Jamaica, Kosovo, and the Philippines. U.S. national security forces and U.S.-supported mercenary armies have used every means to destroy popular revolutionary movements and governments, or even just reformist ones, and install repressive regimes that were totally accommodating to U.S. corporate interests. What a State Department memorandum had to say about Guatemala could apply to any number of places, namely that the government has used indiscriminate counter-terror to combat insurgency. People are killed or disappear on the basis of simple accusations. Interrogations are brutal, torture is used, and bodies are mutilated. We have condoned counter-terror. We encourage the Guatemalan army to do these things. 61. The CIA has stolen elections and waged disinformation campaigns abroad. It has bribed officials, incited ethnic enmities, and funded and trained secret armies, paramilitary forces, saboteurs, torture teams, and death squads. It has pursued destabilization and assassination campaigns against government leaders, labor unions, and peasant, religious, and student organizations in numerous nations. CIA training manuals unearthed by a Freedom of Information lawsuit revealed that the agency taught methods of torture to third world militaries, such as electric shock, water torture, sleep, food and sensory deprivation, and psychological torture such as forcing victims to witness the torture of loved ones, including one's children or parents. Other CIA manuals taught methods of assassination. Torture has become an American export. According to Amnesty International, the U.S. Commerce Department has issued hundreds of export licenses worth more than $27 million for thumbscrews, leg irons, shackles, stun guns, and electroshock instruments, specifically designed implements of torture, much of it to countries with dismal human rights records. After World War II, U.S. intelligence agencies put thousands of Nazi war criminals and their collaborators on the U.S. payroll, utilizing them in repressive operations against the left in Latin America and elsewhere. The U.S. government also used scientists of the notorious Biological Warfare Unit 731, part of the Japanese military during World War Second Unit 731 conducted frightful experiments in China and elsewhere, including human vivisection, with and without anesthesia. Evidence strongly suggests that the U.S. military used Unit 731 scientists during the Korean War to create epidemics of hemorrhagic fever, a disease previously unknown in Korea. Released CIA documents disclose that the CIA maintained a clandestine biological warfare program targeting the populations and crops of a number of countries, including North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Panama, and Cuba. The CIA deployed weather modification technology and sprayed insect infestations to destroy crops in Cuba, along with a virus that caused swine fever, the first such infection in the Americas, forcing the slaughter of pigs in Cuba to prevent a widespread epidemic among humans. The agency is also charged with causing an epidemic of dengue hemorrhagic fever, transmitted by mosquitoes, afflicting some 300,000 people, killing 57 Cuban adults and 101 children, the first major epidemic of dengue in the Western Hemisphere. In 1997, Cuba presented a report to the United Nations charging Washington with biological aggression. 67. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, in various Western European countries, the CIA helped maintain secret paramilitary units to carry out acts of terrorism against anti-capitalist organizations. The House Intelligence Committee reported that several hundred times a day CIA operatives engage in highly illegal activities overseas that endanger the freedom and lives of foreign nationals. The CIA has recruited hitmen for international murder missions, supplying arms and money to Italian and Corsican mafias to murder members of communist-led dockworkers' unions in Italy and France in 1947 and 1950. After these unions were broken, the mobsters were given a freer hand transporting heroin from Asia to Western Europe and North America. Assisted by the CIA itself, anti-communist drug lords in Southeast Asia and Afghanistan increased their opium production and distribution tenfold. CIA involvement in Central America contributed to the U.S. cocaine epidemic of the 1980s. CIA planes transported guns and supplies down to right-wing mercenary troops in Nicaragua, the Contras, and pro-capitalist political and military leaders in other Latin countries. The planes then were reloaded with cocaine for the return trip to the United States. The CIA itself admits having known and done nothing about narcotics shipments to inner-city populations in this country. It was reported that a CIA anti-drug unit was involved in cocaine trafficking. Drug infestation can serve as a useful social control mechanism, keeping low-income African American and Latino youths shooting themselves up with needles and each other with guns, rather than organizing militant revolutionary groups, as in the 1960s. A former official observed, "In my 30-year history in the Drug Enforcement Administration and related agencies, the major targets of my investigations almost invariably turned out to be working for the CIA." 71. In November 1993, a former DEA director and a DEA agent both appeared on CBS's 60 Minutes and detailed the CIA's massive theft of cocaine from DEA warehouses. The cocaine was later sold on the streets in the United States. Likewise, DEA efforts at thwarting the drug outflow from Burma have been stymied by the CIA and State Department on behalf of Burma's corporation-loving drug-running dictatorship. CIA operatives participated in the multi-billion-dollar savings and loan swindles. Monies gained from such deals, along with drug money laundered through various banks and other financial institutions, were illegally used to finance CIA covert activities. A mountain of evidence suggests that elements of the intelligence community, assisted by certain mobsters, were involved in the assassination of President John Kennedy in 1963 and in the subsequent massive cover-up. Political Repression and National Insecurity 133. Kennedy was considered a dangerous liability because of what were perceived as his liberal foreign and domestic policies, including his unwillingness to pursue an all-out ground war in Indochina and his determination to bring intelligence agencies under firmer executive control. In 1982, at the urging of the Reagan administration, Congress passed a law prohibiting publication of any information that might help identify present or former intelligence agents, even if the information came from already published sources. Under that law, some journalistic exposés of illegal covert activities themselves became illegal. It has been argued that a strong intelligence system is needed to gather the information needed by policymakers. But the CIA and other agencies have been unlawfully involved in covert actions that go beyond intelligence gathering, including drug trafficking, mercenary wars, torture, sabotage, assassinations, and disinformation campaigns against the U.S. public itself. With the overthrow of the Soviet Union and other communist countries, the spies and militarists of the national security state faced a shortage of enemies. How would they justify their bloated budgets if there were no adversaries menacing us? New ones had to be conjured: rogue nations, international terrorists, Islamic extremists, and the like. Such alarmist stories did little to protect our national security, but much to protect the budgets of the national security establishment, and much to keep the repressive global apparatus intact.
All right. So what did you think of that?
Yeah, the part about them talking about how it's like illegal to talk about CIA assets. The stuff that came out with The Intercept comes to mind, where they're actually like they posed as a a lefty journalist.
Oh yeah.
Even, and then like get a bunch of people to give the stories and then don't publish anything because they're like, oh no, we can't do that because that might be exposing state secrets and losing state assets. So we're just gonna get rid of I do still wonder like what's in the rest of the Snowden leaks, like that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Also, I have a map up here when you talk about like overthrowing elections. They don't even need to use the CIA anymore because like private companies already do that. When you look at like the Cambridge Analytica. And I seriously doubt that they stopped doing that, even though like Cambridge Analytica kind of got shut down for doing that. But like the map that I have up is all of the countries in which Cambridge Analytica interfered in their elections.
Yeah.
And it's like,
that was all WikiLeaks. Like this was all like, I was looking through the WikiLeaks because of this chapter. I was looking at some of the WikiLeaks again. Yeah, I mean, just, I don't know. Alan Dulles, my God, that man. Like, who the hell did he think he was? Like, he thought he could get away with everything. I wrote here, if you hear the words project or operation followed by some rather mundane trying to pass as whimsical sounding word or phrase after it, you are about to hear about some really disturbing spy plots or some really funny spy plots or really disturbingly and kind of funny spy plots. Because the one I always like bringing up is Acoustic Kitty.
Yeah.
Where they surgically wired, like didn't just put it on the cat, they put it inside the cat. And then they're putting the cat, they wanted the cat to go over to this park across the street from the Russian embassy and spy on the, Russians speaking there and see if they could pick anything up. But like the as the story goes, and I don't know, because they say it's not true, but I think it probably is true because it took them like 10 years saying it wasn't true. That when they set the cat out to do this, it was hit by a taxi, which is sad.
Look, you can't make cats be cops. They try to do it all the time. There's a reason only dogs are cops. Like, you can't make cats be cops.
You can't make cats do anything.
Exactly. Like, trying to make a cat have a job is just like a bad idea, and they should know that by now. So Operation Mockingbird, not to be confused with the JFK era Project Mockingbird, that was a wiretapping done on journalists, or maybe the operation was in conjunction with the project, was the CIA program aimed at influencing domestic American news media through propaganda and manipulation. It involved recruiting journalists and influencing front groups to spread specific narratives. This was uncovered in 1977 by Carl Bernstein and probably continues to go on. I mean, I'm saying probably, but this is from the 1977 article. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. The CIA's use of the American news media has been much more extensive than agency officials have acknowledged publicly or in closed sessions with members of Congress. The general outlines of what happened are indisputable. The specifics are harder to come by. CIA sources hint that a particular journalist was trafficking all over Eastern Europe for the agency. The journalist says no, he just had lunch with the station chief. CIA sources say flatly that a well-known ABC correspondent worked for the agency through 1973. They refused to identify him. A high-level CIA official with a prodigious memory says that the New York Times provided cover for about 10 CIA operatives between 1950 and 1966. He does not know who they were or who in the newspaper's management made that arrangement.
The agency's special relationship with the so-called majors in publishing and broadcasting enabled the CIA to post some of its most valuable operatives abroad without exposure for more than 2 decades. In most instances, agency files show officials at the highest levels of the CIA, usually director or deputy director, deal personally with the single designated individual at the top management of the cooperating news organizations, which that's definitely still happening. The aid furnished often took 2 forms, providing jobs and credentials, journalistic cover, and agency parlance for CIA operatives about to be posted in foreign capitals, in lending the agency the undercover services of reporters already on staff, including some of the best-known correspondents in the business, and to what Rick was saying earlier, like making them kill stories and stuff like that. So
or plant stories.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's definitely like it's funny because people say, oh, it didn't happen, but this is one of the cases, like the CIA was saying things like, we did this, like that's what Bernstein's saying. The CIA said we did this, but then the person's just denying it. You know what I mean? But like, I don't know. Like, I always feel like when you bring up like the CIA saying like, oh, Stalin wasn't a dictator, and then you get people that say, oh, you're going to believe the CIA? It's kind of like, no, it's declassified. Like, it was declassified information that we got. Like, it was their real, what they were really talking about. So.
Well, and the reason that it gets declassified, everyone's like, well, why do they do that? What is the deal? It's because other federal agencies want to know because of their budgets. So like if the CIA is smuggling in a bunch of drugs and you have like a task force that is supposed to be fighting those drugs, and like you do it for like 10 years and it doesn't work at all. And then you might just be like, well, that methodology is terrible and obviously doesn't work, so we need to try something else. But if you later find out that like, oh, well, it was the CIA doing it the whole time, it's like, well, maybe it wasn't the methodology, maybe that was the problem, right? Yeah. And so like a lot of other federal agencies were mad because the CIA sometimes like works against other parts of the government secretly, and so it makes sense that they release it later so that when they do studies on like efficacy of different programs, they can take into account that the CIA was doing some of that shit.
Yeah, one article that came up when I was first like looking, and I mean, I knew about this, but I didn't. I should have known about this. It's Operation Red Sox, and apparently that was the covert operation to back Ukrainian independence that haunts the CIA. So, in late 1949, a series of unmarked flights began launching from Central Europe. Gargantuan C-47s flown by Hungarian or Czech pilots barreled towards Turkey and then turned north over the Black Sea, evading radar by flying barely above the ground. As the planes flew over Lviv, a string of parachutes opened. A handful of commandos tumbled into the sky over Soviet Ukraine. On the ground, they linked up with Ukrainian resistance fighters. Okay, who were those Ukrainian resistance fighters? They were the OUN. Operation Red Sox is as it is known, was one of the first covert missions into the still new Cold War. The American trained commandos would feed intelligence back to their handlers using new radio and communications equipment, stoking nascent nationalist movements in Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and the Baltics. The goal was to provide the U.S. unprecedented insight into Moscow's designs in Eastern Europe, and if possible, to help crack apart the Soviet Empire itself. Over half a decade, dozens of operatives took part in these flights, becoming one of the U.S.'s biggest covert operations in post-war Europe. Ukraine's bloody insurgency was the operation's centerpiece, and it was in Ukraine that, as one scholar wrote, the CIA saw one of its most pronounced failures of the Cold War. So, the Ukraine stuff started, I knew it started right away, but no. that's when we started messing with Ukraine and Russia. So, all right, let's listen to Section 6.
Watergate and Iran-Contra. In June 1972, a group of ex-CIA agents were caught breaking into the Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. The burglary was part of an extensive campaign involving electoral sabotage, wiretapping, theft of private records, and illegal use of campaign funds. It was subsequently revealed that President Richard Nixon himself was involved in the skullduggery and related cover-up activities. Facing impeachment, he resigned from office. His successor, Gerald Ford, promptly pardoned Nixon for all crimes relating to Watergate. Nixon never served a day in jail and retired on his presidential pension. Persons found guilty in the affair were given light sentences. In 1986, another scandal, known as Iran-Contra, rocked the White House. It was discovered that the Reagan administration had been selling millions of dollars worth of arms to Iran, a country it repeatedly accused of supporting terrorism. As part of a covert operation to bypass Congress and the Constitution, Reagan officials funneled the funds from these secret sales to the Nicaraguan mercenaries known as the Contras, who were waging a terrorist war of attrition against a democratic socialist Nicaraguan government. Funds also may have been diverted to pay for the campaigns of Republican candidates. President Reagan admitted full knowledge of the arms sales, but claimed that he had played no role in its operation and had no idea what happened to the money. In subsequent court testimonies, his subordinates said that Reagan had been actively involved in the entire affair, but he never served a day in jail. Despite abundant evidence of involvement by the White House and the National Security Council in Iran-Contra, no reforms to rein in secret operations were implemented. A special prosecutor did manage to convict 11 individuals of destroying government documents, obstructing justice, perjury, illegally diverting funds, and other crimes, 9 of whom received probation and light fines, and only 1 went to jail for a short spell. Some of the people involved, such as former CIA director and then Vice President George Bush Sr., were never indicted, despite testimony directly implicating them. Once Bush Sr. became president in 1989, he pardoned a half-dozen criminals, including Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger and State Department official Elliot Abrams, who later became Bush Jr. Is Deputy National Security Advisor. Much is made of how presidents stand by subordinates who are accused of wrongdoing, supposedly out of loyalty to them. In fact, they usually are bound by something stronger than loyalty, namely self-interest. An underling abruptly cut loose might turn into a damaging source of disclosure. During the Watergate affair, the one aide President Nixon tried to throw to the wolves, John Dean, ended up singing the entire conspiracy libretto to Congress and the world. Generally, it is best for a president who is implicated in an illegal affair to do everything possible to firm up the skittish line of lieutenants who stand between him and lawful retribution.
Okay, so we only have one more section after this. Hello, Rick. I was going to talk about color revolutions. And I was looking at, this is where the WikiLeaks came up. I was looking through the color revolution stuff, and WikiLeaks came up from the Stratfor WikiLeaks. So the Stratfor is that they're like a global intelligence or geopolitical intelligence, and they have like they serve like the United States, like Homeland Security and stuff like that, but also like Dow and other corporations too, and they collect information. So I just want to this was actually an article. It's called "The Global Intelligence Files: Color Revolutions." This, you know how like in the WikiLeaks, it was always like they would share articles and stuff too that were important to them. So let me get into this. So okay, so sorry, this is a little slow. All right, so this was actually written by Gollinger. Ava Gollinger is works with the Chavez Code, cracking U.S. intervention in Venezuela and Bush versus Chavez, Washington's. All right, so she's like a journalist and stuff. So I just wanted to read a little bit of this. In 1983, the strategy of overthrowing inconvenient governments and calling in democracy promotion was born. through the creation of a series of quasi-private foundations such as Albert Einstein Institute, AEI, National Endowment for Democracy, NED, International Republican Institute, IRI, National Democratic Institute, the NDI, Freedom House, and later the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict, that's the ICNC. So if you see those things, you know that they're working, towards they're working towards these color revolutions and stuff like that. So Washington began to filter funding and strategic aid to political parties and groups abroad that promoted U.S. agenda in nations with insubordinate governments. Behind all these foundations and institutes is the U.S. Agency for International Development. That's the USAID, the financial branch of the Department of State. Today, USAID has become a critical part of the security, intelligence, and defense axis in Washington. In 2009, the Interagency Counterinsurgency Initiative became official doctrine in the U.S. Now, USAID is the principal entity that promotes I guess not anymore, that promotes the economic and strategic interests of the U.S. across the globe as part of the counterinsurgency operations. So basically, and then she gets into how the color revolution works, and it was the recipe was always the same. Student and youth movements lead the way with a fresh face, attracting others to join in as though it were the fashion, the cool thing to do. There's always a logo, a color, a marketing strategy. In Serbia, the group OTPOR, which led the overthrow of the Milosevic, hits the streets with T-shirts, posters, and flags boasting a fist in black and white, their symbol of resistance. In Ukraine, the logo remained the same, but the color changed to orange. In Georgia, it was a rose-colored fist, and in Venezuela, instead of a closed fist, they had a hand that was open, and it was black and white to add a little variety. So they just, I think the question is, are they, you have these groups, they're naturally forming, these groups that, there are people that are just always going to be angry with their government. But it's the U.S. that's going in and tapping these people and making them, the unrest happen. And you can always tell when all the signs are in English. Who are you talking to? You want to overthrow your president who doesn't speak English? Why are you writing your signs in English? That was always the thing. That's a big tell. So, do you have anything to add in this, or?
Yeah, I mean, the coup thing. I mean, we can see it. We can see that happening still, and the idea that they use NGOs. But I do think it's really interesting that they have defunded USAID, which I think it's because Trump is way more likely to use direct hard power tactics versus soft power. But it's also interesting to see how much that's going to harm the US's ability to do the sort of things it's been doing.
Yeah.
One of the things that came out from that is that they found out that USAID was funding Boko Haram in Nigeria to destabilize the country and prevent, economic improvement. And the big reason behind those groups. And we see that same sort of thing. I mean, we can make the same sort of assumptions about the other T groups in the Sahel.
Yeah. As you were saying, you were showing the map before, and it's private companies like Cambridge Analytics that was, that are now doing this intelligence gathering and stuff like that. And, the one that I was talking about was, the one that we were just reading on was the, now I can't think of the name, sorry. But couldn't that be true of USAID? Are they moving more to privatization with it?
Certainly. I mean, that's arguably a lot of what Cambridge Analytica is doing, the same sort of things. How do you influence elections in other countries? How do you build social movements? And they do have all this access through the US's domination of social media, which is another reason the US is so pissed at China is because they have an alternative to that.
Yeah.
I think that also they've seemed to have gotten worse at it. Like the coups, there's a lot of failed ones lately.
Oh yeah.
And I think that people have gotten wise to the tactics. I feel like a colored name for the revolution and the flag with the fist on it is
I always wonder when they keep trying to use the same tactics. It's always like, you were already caught doing that. Why are you continuing doing that? Wasn't that in like Tajikistan? Was it there that they actually had the car pull up and then like everybody, the protesters, were like, get out of here. Like they didn't even want like what they were selling. You know what I mean? I have to look that up because I have to. I was recalling it and I meant to look it up before we were talking about this because, it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago that they were trying to do something there, and the protesters were like, "This isn't what we're even about. Like, go away."
Seeing counterintelligence and like the ability, and I think it's also just a lot easier to see them coming now because like all of these organizations are well known. And so, there's probably a good chance that they got rid of the USA idea so that they could do it so that people don't see them coming.
Yeah.
It might also just because they are idiots and they thought it was wokeness, you know? It's got the word hate in it.
Yeah, I'm not. They probably like, honestly, like, Trump really is not very smart. And, he might have thought that, we're wasting money giving aid to all these places.
Well, and that's the thing is that they sold the idea of the CIA as this like progressive thing. And like even their recruitment ads for a while were like targeting like queer people and like minority communities and stuff. And I think that like partly it's just like the getting rid of the DEI stuff, right? Like they're just like, oh, like US aid, like sure, it's soft power, but also it's like it's woke. Like they tried to pitch it as progressive, and they just like don't want to be associated with that anymore. And and also it pisses off Democrats, and they love doing that. So,
all right, let's listen to the last bit here.
Homeland Insecurity. The 11 September 2001 attack on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center in New York, resulting in almost 3,000 deaths, provided an atmosphere of national alarm that made it relatively easy for the Bush administration to embark on overseas invasions, while increasing surveillance and suppression at home. In the weeks before 9/11, the White House had been repeatedly warned by U.S. military intelligence, the FBI, and the CIA of plans for domestic terrorist attacks using explosives and airline hijacking, to be conducted by Muslim extremist networks. Warnings also came from other experts, including the administration's own counter-terrorist advisor, Richard Clarke. Various foreign countries sent warnings that a major attack on U.S. soil was imminent. Attorney General John Ashcroft quit flying on commercial airlines after a threat assessment, and several top Pentagon officials canceled flights the day before the attacks. But President Bush and his associates chose to do nothing about the impending threat. Instead, Bush himself went on one of the longest presidential vacations in White House history. After the attacks had occurred, and using them as a justification, Bush increased military spending, initiated wars against Iraq and Afghanistan, and rammed the so-called USA Patriot Act through Congress without an opportunity for public debate. Under the Patriot Act, the government can monitor people's internet habits, the contents of their computer documents, emails, telephone calls, and the books they borrowed from the library, without a court order, and without having to show probable cause that criminal activity was brewing. Federal agents could now go into homes to copy or seize people's business and personal records while occupants were away. Persons such as librarians, doctors, bank officials, business employers, and neighbors were obliged to turn over other people's personal data to the government, and were prohibited under threat of federal prosecution from telling anyone. For the first time in our history, U.S. citizens could be held indefinitely without a warrant, without charges or hearings or habeas corpus, or benefit of legal representation, and, without being able to contact their families, all in violation of the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments of the Constitution. Given the overly broad definition of terrorism provided in the Act, the government could designate, in violation of the First Amendment, any protest group as a terrorist organization, and any civil disobedience as domestic terrorism. Hardly 2 years after the Patriot Act was passed, over 100 U.S. cities, counties, and towns had passed resolutions calling for its repeal. But in 2003, The Republican-controlled Congress passed additional laws to expand the act by removing judicial oversight and transferring still more power to law enforcement authorities. During that same period, an Amnesty International report revealed that U.S. federal agents were conducting what they called extraordinary rendition, which consisted of abducting individuals in various parts of the world, including the United States, and without any semblance of due process and often without any reliable evidence, sending them off to be interrogated and tortured by regimes abroad for extended periods of time. Other reports indicated that detainees held by U.S. authorities in Guantanamo, Iraq, and elsewhere. No charges were brought against government personnel regarding the abuse and death of detainees. A report by the International Committee of the Red Cross, gathered in 2007 but not published until 2009, revealed that prisoners detained on suspicion of being terrorists were regularly tortured by the CIA. Though kept in isolation at different locations, the prisoners described remarkably similar torments: waterboarding, forced to stand shackled for days in one position, slammed repeatedly into walls, deprived of sleep and solid food, forced to remain naked for months at a stretch, often in frigid cells. All were kept in continuous solitary confinement for their CIA detention, ranging from 16 months to more than 4 years. The White House insisted that spying on U.S. citizens without a warrant and incarcerating people without benefit of a hearing or trial was necessary for our security. Justice Department lawyers provided memorandums stating that the government could ignore international law that prohibits torture and calls for due process. As far as our real security needs are concerned, next to nothing has been done to implement necessary measures within the United States. Airport security remains something of an inconvenient joke. One test survey conducted by the Transportation Security Administration itself found that fake guns, bombs, and other weapons got past security screeners almost 1/4 of the time, 84. As of 2006, our entire agricultural system remained open to biological attack, according to a former Secretary of Agriculture in the Bush administration. Nuclear power plants and chemical plants, many located close to large urban populations, remain vulnerable to attack. Rail yards with tanker cars full of deadly chemical gases were stored behind unlocked and unguarded gates. Millions of shipping containers moved through U.S. ports unchecked. High-tech detection devices were still not in place, and only 6% of containers were physically inspected. During his first year in the White House, President Obama banned torture and some other brutal interrogation methods. But he continued the practice of preventive detention, incarcerating individuals indefinitely for years without charges, and without affording them an opportunity to demonstrate their innocence. His Justice Department ruled that military and intelligence agencies would need the approval of U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder to withhold classified evidence in court. Holder also initiated an investigation of CIA abuse of prisoners. In sum, under the guise of fighting communism, fighting terrorism, protecting U.S. interests, or defending democracy, the purveyors of state power have committed horrendous crimes against the people of this and other countries. The ancient question of political philosophy, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, is still with us.
Okay, just so I have that on record, that is who guards the guardians, is what they were saying there. He does love his Latin. Preventi. Okay.
He learned it, yeah. I mean, he is Italian. So
yeah.
you can forgive him for that.
Yeah. So, in 2014, Obama said, "We tortured some folks when we engaged in some of these enhanced interrogation techniques that I believe, and I think any fair-minded person would believe, were torture. We crossed a line, and that needs to be understood and accepted." And despite admitting that, he was very weak on stopping it. Even though Obama promised to end torture and shut down Gitmo, he never truly did, and refused to go at those involved in the confirmed cases of torture that went on there. So Obama left office with the possibility for future presidents to use torture at Guantanamo Bay facility. Obama leaving Guantanamo open left it for Trump to use, in which now he is detaining immigrants there. So since 9/11, the United States has seen a significant expansion of mass surveillance. And, these were all just stoked by fears and stuff like that. So he brings up like the USA Patriot Act, and then the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. There's been mass data collection. They've increased surveillance infrastructure. The surveillance is like impacting civil liberties, and it usually is mostly on marginalized groups. And the technology, since even 9/11 has been built up greatly, so they've been able to collect a lot of data and surveil us through social media, and they track immigrants and stuff like that. So, and then there was programs like Quiet Skies have been used to monitor passengers based on routine behaviors. So that's out of the TSA. So, anything to add there, Rick?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out like how bad they were at actually even finding people who did anything to torture, because like one of the people that they locked up in Guantanamo was there because he wore the wrong kind of watch. Like he wore a watch that was popular with Al Qaeda, and they had like no evidence on him. And like the reason that Obama couldn't release the people, or their argument was that like none of the other prisons would take them because they would have had to go to court, and they would have absolutely lost in court, and it would have been a huge embarrassment. And then they would have had to pay, reparations to all those people and like admit that like the war on terror was like 95% bullshit. It's just like, it had like nothing to do with anything. Also, just another person to look into in regard to like that whole era is Mike Prisner, who was like one of the guards at Abu Ghraib, and talks like extensively about that and about like what made him realize like what was going on there when he started having to guard the prisoners against the other guards because they were torturing them. He realized that like he's not guarding the people at the base from the prisoners. He's like doing the opposite. And realize who the bad guys are.
It's the whole like I don't know why, like it's the biggest disturbing thing to me is the nakedness, like them taking the clothing and stuff. It's such a psychological, like it's just so messed up. Like it's so messed up to be living for months without clothing on, like in a cell. Like why? And I know why, but it's like, it's just kind of sick to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm a prude. I don't know.
It's psychological torture, and it's like I don't know. I've seen for a while there was like a meme going around of the thumbs up lady. Like and they were using that for other stuff, and a lot of like the younger people didn't know who she was, and it was like, oh, like you guys, like you don't know about that. And that's the thing, is I feel like the reason they could be so brazen about it is that even though it came out, nobody pays attention to it. Like it just like wasn't in the news that long. It doesn't spread that much, and like they don't teach about any of this stuff. And now they're really not going to teach about any of this stuff because of like what's going on at the Department of Education. They're like making sure nobody ever teaches any of this stuff at all.
Do we have a Department of Education anymore? I thought that's going away.
Well, WrestleMania, Linda McMahon. We have
I know it's so it's still like on that article that I was reading about, like it wasn't really all about cop cities, but it was about what was happening here. And what the guy was saying, like for those of us that we've basically seen this coming, but it still is a little messed up that it's happening. You know what I mean? Like it's like I don't know. Like some of the things that they're going after, I didn't even like think they would. Like I knew education, but
the stuff that's happening right now is because of the Patriot Act, like including the tariffs. Like that's like what gave Trump those emergency powers to put in things like tariffs. Is the Patriot Act. And like that was such a big thing, and it was voted on. It was 99-1 in the Senate. They all supported it, and it's wild to see Democrats now get really mad about what Trump is doing when it's like, well, you enabled the president to be able to do all that stuff. And you did it and it wasn't even when there was a Democrat in office. Like that was when a Republican was the president. And so like, you can't even be that, like who are you trying to blame? Like, oh, we didn't mean you should be able to do whatever you want like that. We thought like it was going to only be when, I don't know, the Bush family was in, like it was any better then.
Exactly. It's like, but everything, like even like Obama saying, we were going to end torture, but not codifying anything. Like nothing is ever, they make these promises that they're going to do things and they never do it. And they just assume, well, it's helping me. So what do I care? Because do they imagine that it's always going to be them in office? Do they imagine they know that's not the truth? They know that's not going to happen. So I don't know. That's the thing that gets me so bad. I just keep asking people who are so angry with Trump, why do you support the system? Why? Because the system brought you Trump, and everything that's happening is because of our system. And it just, I don't know. I just don't get how they're not making that connection.
I think some people are starting to finally get it. It's starting to reach more people, certainly not people who are invested in it. I think that's really what it is. A lot of people have invested themselves into things like campaigns and into the party and into pushing for this or that, reform. And if you invest a lot of time in it, you don't want to, it's like sunk cost fallacy. You don't want to give up on all the shit when you feel like you were close or you moved the needle.
Yeah, I supported Medicare for All. It's basically why I supported Bernie. It was the one reason. I knew of Bernie for years and years before that. So I knew he wasn't some communist or something like that. You know what I mean? I knew, he just kind of, he went against certain things, but he was who he was, right? And so I'm Medicare for All, but it's not I don't feel like I had, it was okay for you to support these things. That was that time. Once you start realizing that it wasn't getting you anywhere, just let it go. Just be free from it. Because and that's what I always say, you can say that your country was wrong. You don't have to sit there and fight for, no, the blue guys were good and the red guys are bad. No, you don't have to do that. You can say it's all just been wrong. But I don't know. Rick. But so did you want to add anything else? Because I'll probably we've done 2 hours, so
I think 10 minutes or exactly 2 hours. So.
Yeah, and I so every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
6 p.m.
So I'll, I'll do that. I'll send you what my what I'm talking about and everything, so you can decide to come up. I like having you here. I like having the conversations better than me just talking.
And then maybe I can do if you send me the chapter ahead of time, or maybe I could just look at it actually.
Yeah. It's just So next week we'll be doing chapter 11, which is the U.S. Global Military Empire. Ooh, that should be a fun one. All right. Thank you for coming up here and doing this. And I will thank you, everyone who's been listening. And I will be back next week with chapter 11. All right. Good night, everyone.